Hello and welcome to this video for today. Whether you're here for the first time or you're returning, hope you will enjoy. Hey there guys, getting into this video here for today. This is part 2 of our D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set review. This is where we're diving into the blue and black cards from the set that, I think could see some play in Commander. So we're going to get right into it. First off, some blue cards. And first off in our blue section is this is an interesting card. Demilich, or Demlich, however you wish to say it. It is 4 blue mana for a 4/3, but it costs 1 less to cast if you for each instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. When it attacks, you exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. You get to copy it and cast the copy, and you may cast this guy from your graveyard by exiling 4 instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard in addition to playing its other costs. So, it's kind of a very recursive threat to a degree. It's not very evasive, yeah, sure, but it can be for 0 mana, and I'm sure there's some combos that you can do with it. So I don't think you're caring too much about its body and whatnot and that sort of thing. I think you're trying to use this as a combo piece, so you can cast it for 0, maybe sacrifice it in some way or do something else with it. Yeah, I'm sure there's some storm style stuff that you can definitely do with it. So if you're a spellslinger deck, I would think about it if you can put it in there somewhere and you can take advantage of it somehow and use it in some way, or you can, figure out ways to do something else with it. A lot of the other spellslinger sort of style cards give you free value for the most part, and if you can find a way to get free value off of this, I think it would be really good. Next one up is Mind Flayer, 5 mana, horror, 3/3, so 3 and double blue. When it enters the battlefield, we gain control of target creature for as long as we control Mr. Mind Flayer here. So it's a, threaten style effect, but again, we control it for as long as, this thing remains on the battlefield, which means we can retain it for maybe a little while longer than just like a turn. Some theft decks and whatnot might want this, or some clone style decks might want this. There's a few decks that are like that where, you can only clone things under your own control or whatever. So if you can gain control of somebody else's thing, then you can actually clone it and whatnot. Then you can go ahead and sacrifice their thing or whatever, or even just, I don't know, you'd have to sack their thing first. No, actually, I won't say that you should sack this thing first because that doesn't make much sense. But anyway, yeah, you can sack it then and, still have a copy of it, essentially. There are a few things that you can do to copy things that aren't under your control, but a lot of them are under your control. But still, like, just gaining control of a creature an opponent controls, that's not too bad, for as long as you control this thing. So yeah, I think that there's some decks that would want it, some like Grixis style theft decks and whatnot. So if you're a theft deck, I'd think about it. Next is this interesting sorcery, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, 3 mana sorcery. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile cards with total mana value or CMC of 20 or more. So it's a really good mill card, especially for 3 mana. 20 or more CMC, that's going to be a lot of cards exiled. Even in Commander, you're still going to exile a lot of cards, and you're probably going to exile a lot of good cards. So, I think that this will see play strictly in mill decks, or maybe if you can sort of find ways to, I don't know, make your an opponent cast this and you're trying to mill yourself out somehow or something, but again, then you're milling to other people still, I guess. Well, not milling exactly, but you're getting rid of their library and you're probably trying to take advantage of, them having gotten rid of cards from their library, so you're trying to mill them out or you're trying to mill yourself out, whatever. So, I think there are a few cards that are coming out that deal with casting things from the exile and whatnot. So, I definitely think that there could be some cards that you could take advantage of having opponents' cards in exile and whatnot. Or I think there's a couple cards that say you can put cards from exile into opponents' graveyards and whatnot. So there is ways you can take advantage easily of the graveyard. So if you can put some of those other cards into your deck that sort of put cards into the graveyard from exile as well, you can take advantage of more of these effects. Alright, next, True Polymorph, a 6 mana instant, so 4 and double blue. Target artifact or creature becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature. I don't know, 6 mana is a fair bit for this spell, and to hold up 6 mana is quite a lot, but people hold up Cyclonic Rift mana, so maybe people will just think you're holding up Cyclonic Rift or whatever, but Cyclonic Rift 7 isn't it, I think, or whatever. But still, this is an interesting gotcha card, I guess, or, a card in which you might be like, you know what, you could either get the gotcha moment of going, okay, opponent, instead of you getting that Blightsteel Colossus or that Nyx Bloom Ancient that you're about to cast, I'm going to have you get a Llanowar Elves, or I'm going to have you get a treasure or something, or just a, Mind Stone or something, like something that's not very interesting or impactful, and it's just like, oh yeah, cool, whatever. Great. But, you could do it to your things or whatnot. So somebody goes to play Nyx Bloom Ancient and you're just like, oh, cool, I'll just make one of my treasures into a Nyx Bloom Ancient or whatever. Thanks. I'll take advantage of that before the end of my, last opponent's end step. I'll then untap and have a Nyx Bloom Ancient before anyone else and just go off and hopefully win the game or something, So there are applications for it. So I think some decks would want it if you want to get the gotcha moments, maybe, or if you want to try to copy or clone or, reuse somebody else's things before they get to sort of do it and, gain it for your own advantage. I think you could certainly think about this. And the next one is Wizard Spellbook, 7 mana artifact. So 5 and double blue. You tap it, you exile target instant or sorcery from your graveyard. You roll a d20. You can only do this as a sorcery. You copy the first one is 1 through 9. You copy that spell. You may cast the copy. You copy that card, and you may cast the copy by paying 1 generic rather than paying its actual mana cost. If you get a 20, which is maybe, you copy each card exile with the spellbook. You may cast any number of copies of the copies without paying their mana cost. So the thing here is you exile each one with the spellbook. Essentially, it's kind of like Bag of Holding. So all of the spells will go underneath the spellbook, essentially. So the first one, if you get to copy it, you pay. You either cast it naturally if you run through 9, or you cast it by paying 1 if you roll 10 through 19. So then once you've done that, it goes underneath the spellbook, and then next turn or whenever you can, you just activate this again to cast another spell and another spell until eventually you might get that 20, and then you cast every spell that you've exiled with this. So that can be really powerful and quite good. Yeah, it's 7 mana, but it does do what it wants to do pretty much straight away if it resolves. So maybe in some spell slinger style decks where you want to take advantage of spells in your graveyard that you've already cast, look, recasting spells is just like recursion. Again, recursion is really good because there's always probably going to be something in your graveyard that you're going to want. So it's just very easy to get something out of there. And even if you get, just being able to cast something again, that's pretty decent, or being able to cast it for 1 mana is just like insane, unless of course you've just got a whole bunch of cantrips in there that you could already cast for 1. But again, like, there are a lot of big spells out there. There might be a few ways you could cheat spells into your graveyard and whatnot, so that way you'll get around, hopefully, some of the cost if you get lucky. And in some of the dice rolling deck stuff, there is a few cards that you can take advantage of, extra dice rolls or rolling a higher number and whatnot and things like that. So I think that if you care about spells, I think you've also kind of got to care about dice rolling to a degree. So a lot of this, there's a few spells that also care about dice rolling that are instant sorceries and whatnot. So maybe in that style of deck, yeah, I think this could see some play, certainly. Just depends where. It's interesting to think about where you could see it seeing play. Next, Fairy Wild Trickster, a 3-mana 2/2, so 2 and a blue. Gnome Warlock, whenever you roll 1 or more dice, you create a 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature token with flying. Interesting there's a dragon. That's a bit whatever, but still, just like in the dice rolling deck, this is just like nice free value. It's much like Talrand or Psy Master Thopterus. Yeah, it's much like Psy Master Thopterus in that way. You get this free value out of this thing and whatnot. So if you're in the dice rolling deck, I would definitely find space for putting this in somewhere. Next one is Wizard class. These classes are quite interesting. When you cast it, you basically have no maximum hand size. I know a lot of people really like having no maximum hand size because a lot of people play Reliquary Tower and a lot of people play Thought Vessel. So I do think that mode just for 1 mana isn't too bad, because I see some people playing other effects to basically have no maximum hand size. Then you can pay 2 and a blue, and when it becomes this level, you draw 2 cards. So that's pretty good too, just draw 2 as an additional upside to having no maximum hand size, still pretty good. And then you get to level 3 for 4 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So look, I think that the first 2 modes are pretty good. Not amazing, but they're pretty good. So I would think that if you can take advantage of the first 2 modes, I think you're probably in. And most blue decks, I think, want to kind of have no maximum hand size, or people think they want to have no maximum hand size. But I don't know, but still, like, people like that effect. So I think, people will look at that and go, yeah, I could see some merit to putting this in. Plus, I get the additional upside of some of these other effects later on if I just have, this in my deck. I don't want anyone to think that this is a card draw spell, really. It does draw you cards on that second mode or whatever, on that second level. But I wouldn't take out your divination for it. I'd just put it in a generic slot somewhere in your deck, And then, like, at the end, like, eventually you're going to get to the end maybe and get that, you get a +1/+1 counter whenever you draw cards, and we all know what blue is really good at, drawing cards. So, you get a lot of +1/+1 counters on your creatures, once you've got the gas flowing and whatnot. And then, you can find ways to close out the game with some of your drakes or some of your other things and whatnot. So you're always going to have something, or just your commander, maybe, or whatnot. So again, there's a lot of applications for it. So I think a lot of decks would want to try to think about it. Next one up is an instant. 4 mana, 3 and a blue. You roll a d20. If you roll 1 through 9, you draw 2 cards. So draw 2 cards at instant speed for 4. That's like a going rate, That's not amazingly good, but it's just fine. 10 through 19, you scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Now, that's a pretty darn good spell for 4. But if you roll a 20, it is amazingly good. You scry 3, then draw 3. That is amazing, rate for a 4 mana spell. Yeah, sure, you're at the luck of a dice roll, but the versatility that's on this spell to a degree, and just the baseline is just fine. That's what you got to look at, I think, if you're assessing this card. Look, the baseline is just fine. If you just get the baseline, it's just okay. It's not terrible, it's just fine. But the next level up is really, really good, and then the last one is amazingly good. So, just like if you're running like divination, I would think you replace divination with this, because it's just like at least at instant speed, because what do blue decks want to do? They want to hold up most of their mana and counter a few things or whatnot, but if nothing was worth countering, what do they want to do? Draw cards. So this helps you draw cards, and can give you some upside to be like, oh, I get to scry 2 this time, or I get to scry 3 this time. Wow, I actually got the 20. And especially when you have those dice rolling effects, it gets even better. But again, I don't think you absolutely need it, because the baseline is so good. So I think most decks would want to think about it. Just replacing some of the other spells that aren't quite, as good. Next is Pixie Guide, a 2 mana 1/3 with flying, so 1 and a blue, fairy. If you roll 1 or more dice instead, roll that many dice plus 1 and ignore the lowest roll. So, like I said, there's a lot of dice rolling support coming from this set. Most of it is in red. So this is probably one of the ones that's in blue. It's quite a good card for those dice rolling decks. So yeah, if you're a dice rolling deck, I would consider putting it in. But otherwise, I don't know that it sees much play. Next, you find the villain's lair. Interesting name for this spell. 3 mana, instant. You can counter a target spell, or you can draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Like again, I was saying, what do blue decks want to do? They want to counter your stuff, or they want to draw cards. A 3 mana counter isn't that good, but a 3 mana counter that's also attached to a 3 mana instant speed draw cards, even though you've got to discard cards, you're still going to just discard the 2 worst cards that you have, or the 2 cards that you can't cast next turn, or whatever, or within the parameters of what mana that you will want to hold open for. So I think this is a really good spell and can see a lot of play in blue decks, because you want that flexibility, and the flexibility is what makes this card. So now we'll move on to black. First off in our black cards is the Book of Vile Darkness. So it's a triple black legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, if you lost 2 or more life this turn, you create a 2/2 zombie creature token. You can tap to exile the Book of Vile Darkness, the Hand of Vecna, and the Eye of Vecna to create Vecna, a legendary 8/8 black zombie god creature token with indestructible, gains all the abilities of all exiled cards. So Hand of Vecna and Eye of Vecna. So, like, Hand of Vecna and Eye of Vecna we've seen now, and they're not terribly bad. and we'll be talking about them more individually later on, probably to a degree, just because I think that this is playable, and I think that they're somewhat playable as well. So I do think you really need to want to run all three. So I really think you want to be in a black deck, a very deep black deck. So maybe just mono black for this quote unquote effect, synergy, combo, whatever you want to call it, of getting this 8/8 creature that has all the abilities of all three of the cards. So, once you're in that deck and you want, when it enters, you draw cards, and when you lose life, you get a 2/2, and it pings you for life, and it doubles its power and whatnot, and all this other stuff that the other parts do. Again, the Cauldron pieces are run, the Crown cycle is run. So a lot of these, 3-piece cards are run. So I would think that if you care at all about, trying to find all three of these pieces, which isn't too hard, and getting them all out there and getting the 8/8 and whatnot, and getting all the effects on one thing. Yeah, sure, they're more vulnerable as one thing rather than all three sort of just sitting there doing their job. But once you're going to lose one of the pieces, you've kind of lost the whole piece as well again. So, I don't know, it's kind of interesting, but it does get got by every single bounce effect in the game. And then you've just exiled your stuff, so it is hard. But again, I still think that it is a powerful card and a powerful effect that some decks would want to use. It's hard to say what synergies there are in there or around this. But I don't know what else you're going to do with this, because I think it's just one of those cool I gotcha kind of cards, or not I gotcha kind of cards, but I did the thing kind of cards, like the bucket list style cards of like, aha, achievement unlocked, I got Vecna out, whatnot. So I'm not high on doing that myself, but I know some people are high on, that sort of style of sort of stuff. They're like, oh, cool, I milled somebody out, achievement unlocked, type thing, or whatever. So, if some people want to take this challenge, I definitely think it is playable and worth some time if you are interested in that whole sort of thing. The next one up is Gelatinous Cube, 4 mana, 4/3. Has this ability, much like Ravenous Chupacabra. I think when it enters the battlefield, you exile target non-ooze creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, and then you can get rid of that card by paying X and a black, where X is its mana cost, and put that creature into the opponent's graveyard. So, very much like Ravenous Chupacabra, for the most part, this thing comes in, gets rid of the problem thing that's on an opponent's field for 4 mana. I don't think you really care about putting it into their graveyard until they're going to go to kill this ooze gelatinous cube boy. So I wouldn't worry about it. Just worry about it if somebody goes to kill this thing. It's not like they get it back afterwards or anything like that. So it's still exiled with this thing when they go and kill it, I believe. So that's still pretty. Oh no, actually, it's until it leaves the battlefield. So you do want to get to that point where you can get rid of it into their graveyard if you can before they do kill it. But again, it's not that bad. You get rid of it for a while, and I think you will get there most of the time. So maybe if you have an ooze deck and you don't see many ooze decks out there, so you definitely would want it if you're in a deck that is really about reanimation and whatnot, I would think about it as well, because then you can take more advantage of it. You can keep bringing it back and whatnot, things like that. So there are things that you can do with it. Ravenous Chupacabra, as I said, sees some play in some of those style of decks like Muldrotha and whatnot. So I would think that this is a better card than that. Even though it's non-ooze, there's not that many oozes out there, and you're going to be hitting more things out there in the format than not for the most part. So I definitely think it's worth it in some decks. Next is Sphere of Annihilation, X and black. It enters the battlefield with X void counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you exile this the sphere and all creatures, planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it. And all creatures and planeswalkers in graveyards with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it. So it's a slow exile based, wrath, essentially. It's kind of like, I guess, what is it? Nev's Disc, but it exiles things from the battlefield and the graveyard. Look, if you care about permanence, I would think about it. If you're a Muldrotha, again, maybe you want something like this. I mean, it does exile all things. In graveyards with, yeah, so it does exile your stuff. I was just rereading it to make sure it does exile your stuff as well. So yeah, it does get rid of your stuff. So you might want to really think about it in certain decks. But again, I think it's worth the time to get rid of some other people's decks if you really don't have other ways to deal with their graveyards and whatnot at the time. It's worth it. So yeah, I think you can deal with it, certainly. And sometimes you'll just exile a whole bunch of lands. So you're just like, oh, well, I only exile lands, so it didn't matter. Next is Vorpal Sword. 1 mana equipment. Gives you the creature +2/+0 and Death Touch, and you can equip for double black. That's fine. But the main thing here, I think, that most people hone in on is paying 5 and triple black, and until end of turn, whenever you hit a player, essentially, that player loses the game with the Vorpal Sword, at least, or with the creature that's equipped with Vorpal Sword. So it's a kill an opponent card, essentially. So maybe some equipment decks would want it because, again, you can just have the synergies with all your other equipment and whatnot. And then once you get to the point of going, well, I haven't got much else going on, and I really need to get rid of this person in the game. So you know what? I'll pay the mana and I'll just get rid of them out of the game for now. Especially with some decks that gain a lot of life and your command has been shut down and whatnot, things like this. It can be a good way to get rid of somebody that's just hanging on in the game and you can't deal with otherwise. It might be worth it in some of those decks. So yeah, if you're equipment deck, I would consider it in these colors. Next, Death Priest of Murkrul. I'm sure that I butchered that. But 4 mana, 2/2, so 2 and double black, Tiefling Cleric, Skeletons, Vampires, and Zombies you control get +1/+1. That's just okay. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 1 generic mana, and if you do, you create a 1/1 skeleton creature token. So it gives you more fodder, and it essentially gives you a 2/2 because it's also getting +1/+1 from this thing's own effect. So that's pretty decent. It is only once each turn or once each of your end steps, essentially. So that's not going to snowball too much. But again, it's just free extra value, and that's just fine. I think this might be one of the better cards in Skeleton Tribal. Not in Zombies or Vampires that much, but, just again, if something on your field dies, you get a skeleton as something to get out of it if you can pay that 1. So I think, there are certain ways that you can take advantage of it and whatnot. The treasure guy who makes treasures whenever a creature dies will basically just pay for it. Things like that. There are effects out there. Pitiless Plunderer, that was it, that can take advantage of it. So yeah, I think it's worth thinking about. Alright, next, Warlock class. 1 mana class enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. So that's a nice little effect. It's only, again, for 1 creature, or for if a creature died. So, it doesn't matter if you kill 10 of your creatures. I don't think it only happens once, essentially. But that draining effect of your opponents, or that losing life effect on your opponents, is worth it to a lot of these sacrifice-based decks that do a lot of this sort of stuff. Then level 2 for 1 and a black. When it becomes level 2, you look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, the rest of your graveyard. If you care about stuff in your graveyard, which black often does, it's quite good. It does just draw you 1 essentially, but again, if you've got ways to take advantage of your graveyard, it's quite good. And again, in Muldrotha decks, this is a permanent, so you can take advantage of it that way as well. So if it dies, you don't really care, you're just going to bring it back anyway. Then once you get to level 3, which is 6 and a black, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. You get this essentially wound reflection style effect at the end there, so that's really quite good as well. And I think there are some decks that would want to think about putting another wound reflection effect in their decks, especially when it does all this other stuff. So if you've got a fair bit of synergy with most of what this is doing, I would definitely consider it. Again, it's definitely playable in some decks. But that's pretty much it for the black cards. I'll be back soon with part 3 and part 4. So yeah, let me know what you think of all of these cards. Write it down there in the comments below. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. You can also get social with us on our Facebook. To follow all the updates, make sure you hit the like button. And on our Discord, to get into it, please leave a comment and I'll send you an invite. All links are in the description. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today. And if you have, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. And I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.